Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reacts, where today we have ourselves 3 tracks from an act named Nick Alexander. The first of these titled Dark, and if we switch over to here we have ourselves the tracks on their Spotify page. They also have a YouTube and Apple Music account. So here we've got the single art on the screen here, and we're going to listen through this track as well as 2 others from start till finish. And we're going to hear what we think. But let's do it. Nick Alexander with Dark.
By the lake, it's freezing to the bone in around, but I hear the feeling like the shatters in the ground. I'm blind, I walk through the meadows that are creeping inside out, and deaf don't hear the killing of souls homeward bound.
Great use of follow there as well.
All is dark. All is gone. The letters are in tethers, in and out. All I hear are the shadows in the meadows crying drought.
Elegant use of double tracking as well here.
Forget the pain, oh, that started, that departed, reaching out. I take the blame for the sorrows that follows, and there's no sound. 'Cause it's dark. 'Cause it's dark. Where the shadows and my sorrows intertwine, like the time when our emotions are combined. Deeper love lost in the corner of the past. To follow that road, to follow that road.
I like the inclusion of pianos and strings here.
By the lake, it's freezing to the bone in around. I take the blame for the sorrows that follows. There's no sound. To follow that road, love is gone. Where the shadow
really pleasantly surprised by that one. Phenomenal first impression. Let's talk about it. So in these end of track sections, we're going to be providing sort of like mini conclusions where I talk about various aspects of the tracks I appreciated, from like vocals through to production. And then we're going to have like an overall kind of conclusion analysis at the end, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think this track is about? My understanding of the song, from what I heard in the first listen perspective, is that it's about someone who is carrying the weight of the emotions as they go through the darkness there without a sound there. And they're maybe finding others as they go through the piece, such as the backing vocals and how kind of bright and how much of a contrast the latter part of the track is to the first part. But I get the impression that we're carrying a weight on our shoulders as we go through this piece there. We look at the meadows and the shadows overcast everything there. And it's almost like our entire world is black until we regain the composition to be able to follow that road that we need to, despite all the trials and tribulations that we might sort of go through. I think that's kind of what it's about. I could be wrong, but it's my first sort of like, that's my guess at it. So vocally, incredibly compelling. Nick Alexander has a fantastic head and chest voice, very comfortable in their vocal range. We explore it really neatly. I love the kind of three different voices we have, like in the first verse there, how we're very sort of somber, very kind of quiet, and it's very tender and kind of showing a bit of vulnerability there. And there's a kind of a breathiness there, almost an ASMR-ish kind of a quality to certain parts of it. As we go into our head voice, as we go through the piece there, we start to lift up a little bit. And you know, like we resonate and have great presence within the mix, especially as those strings and those keys come in to further accent a lot of those guitar parts we had instantiated earlier. Once the full distorted guitars, bass and drums come in that final section, they've got those really just beautiful vocal harmonies there glowing on the sides of the stereo field there. The track just lifts up and it's just really wonderful to listen to. And it's very rare that you have a musician really explore their vocal range in a way that is practicable within a piece. Often you'll find that if they do so, it's in these kind of flurries or runs there, which they're still compelling. And don't get me wrong, like within each of their individual parts of their range there, they showed great legato technique. There was wonderful vibratos, and I like that we explored these melodies and ideas in a piece where there was a kind of unorthodox chromatic kind of shift, like down the bass notes as we went through those loops, especially in those verse sections. But yeah, we navigated the harmonies really well. The chord progressions, regardless of the instrumental components, found presence, and it was just great to listen to their story. And the expression, I feel, varied in a way that was appropriate to the subject matter we were discussing there. We got different angles of their capabilities as we progressed. Structurally, very compelling. We had various stages, such as, again, the first part we had, I think, we had like a verse chorus structure in different chapters there. We had mainly the acoustic steel string guitar there alongside Nick, kind of walking us through the first part of this first act of the three. And as we went forward there, we had these kind of clicks and piano elements there that were included, and the strings adding a bit further kind of mid-range kind of folkish influence there that I think suited or niched nicely with both the rhythms and the note choices that were played by those acoustics. And then in the final point where we kind of really built ourselves up and everything kind of exploded and came to life there. And I like how the drums and the guitar presented, as well as the technicality proficiency of the percussion performance. You know, it already had enough instrumentally and compositionally of interest, but just to give us more than what you might typically assume you'd get, especially with most of the track being the way it is. Just that extra bit of kind of like laser focus at the end on not taking the listen for granted was much appreciated. It's just a great sort of logical development through it, and it felt like you went on an adventure. The steel string guitars were pleasant to listen to. They played a variety of different sort of fingerstyle parts there, capturing different major and minor triads there, working through their bass notes, rolling down the part there. We played sort of like chords and elements there that were very kind of wistful and somber, and we weren't trying to go too dark with it, even though we potentially could have with the subject matter. I thought it was also good to have the kind of some of the foley there and certain elements there of like the wind, which is kind of nice. You can hear the kind of those sounds there. It made it seem more like a cinematic experience. And I think as we went through the piece, especially around the 2-minute mark, for example, you did start to hear those additional vocal layers on the sides there. It's like our voice started to become brighter. We started to feel more hopeful about breaking out of this kind of like situation we're in there, or at least we felt more confident about our ability to get through it there. And as we changed to a more assertive fingerstyle part around the with some percussive techniques on the guitar there around the 2-minute 45 mark. It was nice for the piano to play certain notes on the right hand, the highlighted notes that were previously performed either vocally or on the guitar there. It was just nice to have that further sort of self-awareness and chemistry between the elements. And for the strings to reinforce sort of more of the sort of triad-oriented parts of the piece there to kind of fill in the spectrum with a different rhythm there and just make the most of the free, just to make the most of the space provided there was. You could tell things were building, but they still left some stuff in the ceiling. I think around that 3-minute 30 mark where there's that part where it says there is no sound, just you're surrounded by darkness. And then everything comes into play. You hear the clock ticking there, like you're almost coming, like we're winding down to something like the bombs exploded or something. For there to be that kind of gap where previously we'd gone into more of the acoustic stuff that we'd previously done, for it to then go to distortion was a nice heel turn there. And the power chord elements that we play on the guitars, especially like the really cool drum grooves there with the main sort of chord as 8 triplets and 16 rhythms adhered to, plus some 30 seconds, some really cool double kick and snare patterns. Exploring the toms as well, there was some flams and interesting sort of like fills that didn't to try to step away too much from what was going on, although there were some nice kind of breaks there between parts, almost like column responses with the drums allowing to do whatever it needed to. And there were some vibratos and parachordal elements there as well. There's some sort of like Phrygian or sort of flat seconds occasionally for the darkness, but like just really well considered, made the most of the distorted guitar with the heaviness of that. Texturally very appropriate. And I think again, some of the heaviness of those guitar, bass and drum elements was balanced by the vocals and the upper harmonies as well. They did not sort of make it too much of a difference in the previous part. Like we established tonal equilibrium. And again, there wasn't a note out of place. It's a very competent instrumental performance, and it was just cool to have themes that, again, we didn't just play major or minor chords. We had some sort of susses and unconventional inverted parts there due to the fingerstyle parts there. The diatonics applied to within. I think there were some parallel majors in those chorus sections at the end there, but just typically diatonic element and not trying to be too sort of chromatic or edgy with it. But just, it's almost like it gave us a feeling this was almost sort of like ethereal or mystical, but you also felt the force of those individual textures kind of driving you along in a way that was extremely satisfying. And ultimately the studio, recording, mixing, mastering, the production was tight. Different vocal layers, whether in the mains or the highs, nicely panned on the sides of the stereo field. The rhythm guitars, especially the distorted guitars in the end sort of like double tracked really nicely, great sort of tone to them. Distinct texture from the clean guitars there that were more sort of centered in stereo field. I was making to kind of make it seem like Nick Alexander was playing the guitar as he walked through the darkness. The strings, keys, bass, drums there, drums nice for that in the free stereo field as well. There was dynamic range to it. There were moments where things completely stopped and there was no sound. I thought that was great to have that sort of like connection there between the words that were being said. And I know it seems like an obvious thing, but it's really not, You don't always get that sort of like connection there, but nice and low without pumping. Bit of pump, well, actually, no, there was a bit of pumping, some of those kick patterns and side chaining, but not to an extent where it's clearly not an EDM track. Great, a lot of life to it. Fantastic, again, fantastic first impression, and it makes me want to hear more. Because you have Paperthin, track number 2. Great development with the piano here, playing those arpeggios.
Time is all I desire, and I can't make it last. Breathe all of the fire as I watch it burn inside out. I'm taking a while to get used to this. It's like a broken clock that keeps me still low high. But I'm feeling paper thin.
Great inclusion of the drums here, much less of a slow burn than the previous track.
Sets you back a million years, so cold. I
We do have reverb tails on this, that's fun. Oh, and we're allowing that tail to go out. That's nice. No, that's sensible. The last thing you want is to have, you know, a delay or a reverb not sort of like be captured in full and then you just kind of blunt the track at the halfway point of it. No, that's great. Paperthin. I mean, it doesn't seem like they were having a fantastic time. Just for clarity's sake, I think this was recorded in 2023 or released in 2023. I think Dark was released in 2026, so this year. So they do sound like they're in different parts of Nick Alexander's life, but I can hear a connection stylistically between the two. I mean, it's not the same type of music, to be fair. This one's a little bit less dramatic than the previous one. I kind of like that we can approach music from different angles. And outside of the lyrics, of course. The lyrics, the lyrics are pretty intense. Time is all I desire and I can't make it last. Breathe all the fire as I watch it burn inside out. I get the impression from listening to this as well as just reading through about it also in general that this track is more about someone who is, struggling to deal with the current situation they're in. They're feeling paper thin because they're on tender hooks and they're like a broken clock, I can't say so. They're tired. They're just tired. They're taking a while to get used to it, primarily because, I mean, maybe they're not supposed to get used to this, but they feel like they have to, and it's just they've been messed up by what they've gone through, and they're just trying to rebuild themselves potentially, but it's difficult for them to do so. So I feel the tenderness of the vocal performance in that lower end as well as in the higher end. Like there are some really cool vocal harmonies that go on in those chorus sections between the head and chest voice, and it's just very easy to get those to meld together, especially if they have a similar kind of approach or emphasis. There's nothing, and I mean, there are some sort of like more louder kind of belted parts outside, at the end of the track there for that bit of extra emphasis or oomph there, especially after that guitar solo. You kind of want the vocals to go up after that. But we never get the feeling that we're singing at someone. We're always singing to them, or we're sort of singing our truth, I suppose, to not be too sort of like, but like we typically try to sort of resolve to a lot of the majors kind of quotients of the piece there. I think that the key signature for this track is a major, so maybe with the way we're expressing ourselves, we're more sort of being very gentle about how tired we are in a kind, caring, loving way. Even if we're kind of tired of what we're experiencing and we want to sort of have a change there, we're still showing appreciation for the fact we had an opportunity in the first place. Or like maybe that's just me sort of like tripping, but like either way, again, considerable vocal technique there, very comfortable in the microphone. I like the legato sort of smoothness of certain notes, transitions there. And we, when we call and respond, or we're harmonizing together, or we kind of fill the ether with different takes, whatever we're doing on the mic, it works. So the track itself at 4 minutes 37 is made up of various instrumental breaks, choruses, and verses, as well as like the solo section at the end. And I feel like we make the use of that 4 minutes 37 in a way where it doesn't overstay its welcome. You have a similar approach with the sort of makeup of this piece to the last one, in the sense that you start with those guitars there with the single coils, but you have so many more elements that get introduced so much more quickly than the previous track. We have like keys, and we have hi-hat shimmers and stuff like that, like hi-hat closes and all these elements there that are introduced slowly, and they fill the stereo field really neatly. Well, it's not just everything in the same exact place, because that wouldn't make sense for multiple reasons. But we have this kind of almost hypnotic looping of these guitar parts on the side there. That's just a very sort of satisfying kind of like riff, and it goes really neatly alongside the piano keys and arpeggios that we have there, with like a more on some kind of lonesome fiddle or string section at some point on the right side of the stereo field there being a sub layer that elicits more sort of a hint at where we're headed with how it harmonizes with the roots there, again, that major leaning there. And again, it's a track where even though some of the subject matter inside the lyrics is quite heavy, the music isn't trying to be too blunt about that. And when we have the whole entire drum kit in, with the, the rides, the kick snares, etc., we're never too aggressive with it. Like you can tell that we're nice and tight with the eighth note grooves across the board there. And actually a lot of the tom fills resound around that sort of eighth note passage there. We're very groove oriented with this one. In fact, that rhythm system is established with the guitars, with the piano and stuff. The eighths are dominant throughout. As regardless of whether we're going like normal half time through a lot of these sections there, especially in early parts there, or normal time or even double time, 1, 2, 3, 4. But to be fair, the snares aren't there at that point, so it's probably just normal time. But when the guitar solo comes in there and we play, I mean, clearly it's a melodic solo. It's kind of, even when the guitar comes in, it's kind of fuzzy sounding with some interesting reverb tails. And it's very kind of misty within the ether. We have some nice vibratos and bends and slides and techniques there. We can clearly play the instrument neatly. We have some notes which kind of rub up against each other, not in a bad way, just that they're quite close within the frequency spectrum. They're like a fret or two apart. And it kind of becomes a little bit sort of bluesy, a little bit kind of rocky, but not in an abrasive way, working alongside the pentatonics. And it's just a very kind of pleasant phrasing and cadence for that alternate lead there. It's done in a similar way to how you might imagine the vocals to be done there. So I think that's more of a vocal-oriented guitar solo rather than shredding for the sake of trying to show how well we can play the instrument. And that's never been a thing with Nick Alexander, to be clear. Like they're not that kind of, that they understand how to create cohesion and chemistry between elements. But that's exactly part of why the guitar solo goes out to that outro part so effortlessly. You know, we have the organ, I think, come in before this as well there for almost a sort of spiritualistic kind of shimmer, ethereal sheen to it. And I'm not sure why, like, because we had keys, and then to add a different key section there is a deliberate decision, but clearly it is because it's been implemented. I suppose we just wanted an alternate kind of softer texture there to help kind of amalgamate. But as we continue to have that previously established kind of lead guitar tone be more of a sub layer with those vocal overdubs over top there, it's almost like all these thoughts are overlapping each other to create this kind of tapestry there. But it's so kind and caring and gentle, even with the sharpness of some of those vocal takes and the higher end and the drums there, that it's like a soft, cozy, warm blanket. And I think thematically, working with the major pentatonics or the major scales in general was a smart move because it's very palatable and easy to listen to. Because if you listen to the lyrics there, it's interesting because of the duality between the darkness or negativity of some of the stuff we're discussing was that, you know, with again the major leaning of things. And I think it's testament that we can make a track within the major key that does not sound cheesy or overdone or generic there. I think part of it is the intricate layering of these different instruments. I also think part of it is it's just kind of like a chilled out kind of like half asleep Labrador. The way that we have those really pretty chimey reverbs at the end though to lay us out was a smart move there. We have that bell curve take us up and then take us back down again. And then the track is done. We finish and we've heard Paperthin and we appreciate it. Similar comments with the studio production there. I think just the way that we were able to add things as we went through that first minute or so of the piece without things becoming overwhelming. All these different spaces and niches that are found for elements there, showcases sort of a core understanding and advanced understanding in the studio side of things. And I like that we had range dynamically to the vocals, that we weren't choking them too much, that we allowed some parts to be quieter and some parts to be louder there. It wasn't just a frequency sort of response thing. It was literal implementation on their part to be able to get that range there. Just very pleasant sounding music, and I just feel like this is a nice accompaniment to dark. We have Shadows, track number 3 for today. Oh, good choice. The reason I say good choice is because it was sounding like Somewhere Over a Rainbow for a little bit.
The shadows in the sky, they just chase me all night.
Is that
Where
nice?
did it all begin? Where did it all go south? It's dark and stronger. Where do I go? Where do I feel? It all goes away so fast. The creep inside my brain, deception in disguise. Why do you follow me? They can't see the light. They don't know where they go.
That's very resonant.
They can't find me here. Oh, light, blinded by the light. The night, the stars fade between. Where do you go? Oh, where do you go? 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 Shadows in my heart, they just haunt me my whole life. Where did it all begin? Where did it all go south? Run, run, run. Where do I go? Where do I feel? I try to run away, so fast, they creep inside my head. Inception in disguise. Where do you follow me? Oh, they can't see the light. They don't know where they go. They can't find me here. Oh, light, blinded by the light, shining through the night. The stars fade between. Oh, where do you go? Oh, where do you go? Oh, where do you go? Where do you go? Where do you go? Where do you go?
Okay.
They can't see the light. They don't know where they go. They can't find me here. Oh, light, blinded by the light, shining through the night. The stars fade between. Oh, where do you go? Oh, where do you go? Where do you
halftime.
go?
Where
do you go? Where do you go? Oh, where do you go? Oh, where do you go? Oh, where do you go?
So that was an interesting third component to this review here. Shadows by Nick Alexander. I get the feeling that Shadows is, when we get the start, shadows in the sky, they just chase me all night. Where did it all begin? Where did it all go south? My wondering is, my thoughts are that this is effectively about, again, the mistakes that we make in the past, trying to get away from them, getting away from them, trying to find a place to hide from them, just struggling with the skeletons. You know, struggling with our guilty consciences, whatever works. I feel that just to sort of like present this before we get into the overall conclusion, this is subject matter that most, if not all, people are going to be able to relate to. So I think it's sensible to make music like this for like several reasons, not least because it's Nick Alexander's, like what is meaningful to them. So I respect why we're making songs like this. I think it's smart and sensible subject matter. But yeah, I think the earnestness in the way that we're approaching the question of like, where do you go? You know, that makes total sense. I mean, like, they can't find me here, blinded by the light, shining through the night, the stars fade between. I mean, I like the imagery, it's vivid, but I also like that we're also not over-explaining it, and you got to think about it a little bit. Another sort of like really competent vocal performance here, again, very comfortable in Ian's just voice there. They sing with sort of sustainable technique there. The vocals are kind of present in the mix. There was an interesting part where like we had double tracked vocals and they kind of split with automated panning there slowly across the sides of the stereo field. And while I appreciate the effect that they had there, it was kind of cool for like things to go around. I also wonder if it was kind of dominant over the guitars in that part of the mix. So I think initially I could play like, yeah, no, the vocals and the guitar are exactly where they need to be in terms of leveling. But as we went through the piece, just at that part where there was the double track thing, they just seemed a little bit resonant. Literally, that's the first thing I've sort of nitpicked, you know, throughout this entire review. We're doing very well. There's a wonderful low-end presence to his vocals when he gets there. Like, I'm wondering what kind of microphone is he recording? Is he recording through like an SM7B or something like that can capture that? I mean, either way, it's really cool. I like the tone and timbre of his voice and the way that it works alongside those guitars. It's a very kind of sleepy sounding sort of like situation here, like in a similar way that we had some like room noise. Well, not room noise, to be fair. It's more like you can kind of hear the sound of the room in certain parts of this with the guitar attacks. There's a little kind of hum there, which lets you know they've like live recorded it, which is always a good time. Because this song structurally, effectively, is verses and choruses with those sort of guitar instrumental breaks there. We do build as we go through it. Like we add the strings as we go further along, and then we have the bass go behind that acoustic guitar solo there. And then the drums come into sort of further element stuff or elevate stuff in that end point there. It's more similar to Dark than Paperthin, but the guitars are just a wonderful, nice sort of chipper and cherry friend to the vocals and Nick Alexander there. We have these, we're using a capo, I would imagine, on the maybe a guitar, maybe a 12 string or something like that there. We use some interesting ninths for that third chord there that makes it sound very kind of nice and sort of like, it's just very kind of bright because it is playing a string rhythm there. You don't particularly need any sort of like percussive elements earlier on there, and that's what helps to keep us through or sort of steer us through the piece. When you have less instrumental components as well, it forces you to pay attention more to the story as well by lack of that. And what's really cool is that the focus on having just the guitar and the vocals allows us to be kind of surprised when we have that bass come in. It's so thick and full on the low end there. It holds its presence there. It's kind of very powerful, and especially when you've got the lead guitar dancing around there with you've got some string noise that you can kind of hear how kind of rustic is though. We navigate those modes and scales really effectively there. Some kind of sassy, kind of bluesy phrasings there, some interesting sort of like decisions with no choices. And we also change our phrasing rhythmically with those lead guitars to kind of be a bit more sort of abstract from what we've previously put forward. I think that's just a sensible idea to shake things up, you know, in a way that's kind of organic and similar to what some of the cadences or sort of decisions made on the vocals. The use of the drums in that last sort of minute or so there with the hi-hats, kicks and snares there, pushing forward with that eighth note groove, it's just a sensible decision because it almost sort of assumes that when we're at that 4-minute mark, we might need something different in order to carry us through the rest of the piece there. It's just a no-brainer in my view to have something bigger to kind of carry us out there. And it's just a really simple drum beat as well there. You got the strings kind of glowing over top of it and kind of flittering about there, and it sounds incredibly elegant, and it's just, we know where our priorities are. And the bass kind of explores a little bit of its fretboard as well there, and it's just nice to allow a bit more sort of freedom for things like that. And like, to be fair, the drums do change things up occasionally. You have some extra kicks or some bubs, you know, and we play around with the meter of it and sort of groove a little bit there. We have our fundamentals down, and I think, to be fair, it's either quarters or either 8ths or 16ths through this thing. But they do a great job of trying to get that kind of like, where do you go hook line in your head there. The shadows is a very literal thing, kind of, well, not literally literal, but you know what I mean, like you understand what they're referring to with shadows following them very soon on. So it's more of a kind of a conversation with a listener that I have with it, which I think is a nice touch. And I like that we still kind of stick to a very kind of relaxed and friendly major key tonality here with a lot of these chord choices, as well as including sus2s on ninths there. Kind of makes it seem charming, again, despite the subject matter, which is something we can sort of allude to within Paperthin, where we're darker, a bit more sort of on the nose about it without being too blunt. This is kind of interesting kind of romanticism with the way the strings kind of fluctuate over top of the rest of the elements within the mix around the 4-minute mark. And I know we have strings before that, and it's almost kind of like we're hinting at what could be throughout most of the track, and then everything comes together at the end, where we're kind of focused more on the question of the practicality of a pragmatic approach rather than looking at the why or the how or the what, I suppose. But honestly, yeah, good choice with the key signature and chord progressions, and then just the studio production. I feel it's good. I feel like the studio production is good. I mean, I remember mentioning that the vocals were kind of present in certain parts of the piece to an extent where I might be a little bit too much, but I do appreciate the use of sort of automation with the panning there to bring them to the sides. I thought that was kind of cool. And the main sort of like vocal layers and sub layers are typically well presented. You can kind of easily follow along what's going on there. I think when the drums come in, they're nice and bulky and they have great presence in the mix as well. They're not too compressed, and they're definitely not under compressed. They've got got oomph to them, and it's what you want for that final march out. And just generally with its strings or the bass, but mainly the bass is prominent because of a lack of low end resonance with the majority of the track until that point. I think just filling the track out by having the guitars go high, the bass go low with the leads is cool. And generally, I just think these are 3 well presented tracks. But we're going to talk about them more in the conclusion. And so welcome to the conclusion of my review of these 3 tracks from an act named Nick Alexander, titled Dark, Paperthin, and Shadows. In this section, I'm going to be providing an overall song analysis of these 3 tracks, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think these tracks are about? I think these tracks are talking about the kind of darkness surrounding them, the journeys that they've had, such as Dark more recently. Paperthin about dealing with changes and how it can really kind of hollow you out. And then Shadows looking at what we've done in our life and both how to cope with those things, is how to sort of like get away from those problems, or how to sort of like take care of ourselves, I suppose, and asking the listener for their advice, almost like they're having a conversation with us. I think that these tracks, these subject matters, if I not completely misinterpret them, are quite compelling. It's very pleasant music to listen to, and even though they have gone through some stuff and they're struggling in some parts, the experience listening to Nick Alexander is incredibly authentic. They technically are very competent in hitting his voice, great vocal technique there, great use of legatos and sort of like vibratos and bits of vocal ornaments. We explore not just the diatonics but also chromatics occasionally. We harmonize neatly regardless of whether the chords are playing nice or there's some kind of quirkiness going on. We have sort of main melodies as well as vocal harmonies there which surround us in the stereo field there, and we even have some interesting ideas there with the double track and the Shadows where it kind of pans out over time there, which it's mainly just a level in there, but otherwise very happy with the actual design decision there. I thought that was kind of cool, it's like the sun rising or the clouds parting. What makes this music work so well is that, especially in tracks like Dark, where they are so well segmented and there's a lot of difference in the way that the track is presented with the music and instrumental performances, like it's just really cool to hear Nick be personable with the expression and approach of it, even regardless of whether on a head voice or a chest voice there, or a bit of falsetto occasionally, maybe even. It's just, they sound like an old soul. They don't sound like they're overreaching. They hit the notes well and pick great sort of like lyrical cadences, and you can tell that they're just kind of lost in their own music, and it's an experience that they're communicating to you that they've gone through. And they are very sort of, again, aware of what the instruments around them are doing, which just, you can't really fault it, to be honest. It's very, very good. The reverb tails on some of the vocal takes are fantastic as well. Kind of gives a bit of airiness within the mix. And I like that they're not overcompressed. These tracks are around 4.5 minutes in length. They're between 4.5 and 5 minutes, which is outside of the 2 to 4 minute sweet spot. When a track is longer than 4 minutes, you just need to make sure that you're either chapterizing it, such as with Dark, where you had vocals and acoustic guitar for the first act, you had piano, guitar, and vocals, as well as like strings for the second act, like the mid part, and then finally you have like the distorted guitars, bass, and drums, and everything in the final part, in the finale. And I like that we did that with Dark, that we didn't just take the listener's attention for granted, that we offered a lot of range compositionally, that we had little pauses between each of these 3 bits there. The first time we added a bit more kind of oomph, then we kind of rose a little bit, but the second time we had that pause, and you could hear the clock ticking and stuff like that, that bit of foley there, it just bolted, and it just sounded huge. And it's just fun. It's just fun composition, despite, again, like some of the more kind of like heavy subject matter. It's just sensible, smart sort of songwriting there that is compelling, and it's just sensible songwriting. It's just really clever stuff, and I like that it was also played quite well. I mean, across the board with these tracks, a majority it was guitar oriented, whether it was kind of fingerstyled acoustic kind of riffs with various sort of majors and minors, or like bar chords, or like sus2s or ninths there. We had a great sense of rhythm and groove with the guitar parts there when there was a lack of drums or something like that. And we knew how to double track and make the guitar sound huge, but we also had different guitar solos with different slides and hammer-ons and pull-offs and like bendy bits and all that kind of stuff. So we knew how to do that with both electrics as well as sort of like acoustics there. And we had like the string sounds in the recording, so you could tell they were clearly playing these parts and it was like a solid take. You know, we knew to allow the guitar to be kind of like an alternative voice within the mix and to not sort of try and make it about the guitar. We knew how to make the lead guitar solo a team player. And I also appreciate in Dark here, where at the end part where it was the heavy kind of distortion there, we stuck mainly to power chords with some sort of like lower kind of vibrato kind of riffs there and it sounded visceral, but like not over the top. And I think that they rode the line neatly between making it too heavy and like enough of a distinct kind of like a choice from the most of the track before it. Like we needed power behind it and we found it. The drums varied considerably between these tracks. Shadows was very much kind of more sort of eighth note kind of kick and snare and hi-hat oriented when it did come in for that final minute or so. Dark was just an absolute kind of like contrast to that. Like we had a variety of different 8th, 16th, and sort of 30, even 30-second kind of double kick and snare and cymbal and tom grooves and lots of interesting fills and concepts there that sounded like a 3-minute track within 1 minute 10. Not because it sounded longer than it was because it was uninteresting, but just sounded massive. It took your attention. And I think if you'd listened to these tracks in reverse, you would have gone, oh, Shadows, Paperthin, Dark. Oh, what is he doing? You can just tell that they've been putting a lot of work into their percussion at that point there, and it just sounded huge. And it shows that we can play the heavier stuff when we need to explore. You know, we're clearly a skilled multi-instrumentalist, but we also know how to write for these instruments and establish moods as required through these pieces in order to suit the subject matter. We needed more push in that last part and we got it. The bass lines were typically kind of reserved there. I do dig that we also knew how to be a bit more sort of subtle about it, like in the hi-hat close of Paperthin at the early points, then we were interesting a lot of different concepts there. I like that we were a bit more gentle when we needed to. We just had ranges on the kit. The bass was nicely rounded out, especially in one of the songs where like we had a kind of a guitar solo and just the bass was just thunderous underneath. It was just huge sounding and it had a nice sort of body to it. Similar concepts or like comments of Tit and Dark as well as Shadows there, but like we didn't overplay the bass either. And I'd also kind of like to say the similar kind of idea about the piano. We understand how to play the keys, we articulate our right hand really neatly there, we explore arpeggios and various sort of chord progressions in parts there, but it's not like we're trying to overshadow the vocals or anything like that there. The piano is a fantastic sort of appreciable complement. In Dark, there are some highlights or accents on the right hand that helped it sparkle and were a nice contrast to the guitar parts up until that point. I'd like to sort of think of it in a similar way to the strings where, again, you could have had some really virtuosic string parts there, some bows and pizzicatos and all sorts of kind of crazy stuff, but typically the strings for the most part were kind of more of a support layer in that mid-range. They were a nice kind of warm, lush texture that was very kind of cozy and comforting for the most part, regardless of whether they were working with the majors or minors. And we had bits of Foley again, like the clock ticking or like the wind in Dark and other parts there. And I just think it was just nice to explore and make more of a cinematic experience out of it, as well as some sort of sub drops. I think at some point, if I'm not mistaken, there was some doom kind of parts there. It was just huge. Then there was also an organ in Paperthin. There just as an additional key layer there as a sub for that guitar solo part. And it was just nice to have a different form of the keys there that was a bit more kind of misty sounding and worked within the ambience of the other bits there. And as a final note there, just for Dark, we had like a percussive feel to the way that we played in that middle section there when the keys and the strings came in. And it was just nice to have the guitar used as an alternate drum kit. In a very sort of like small way, but still like, you know, not resorting to the drum kit until the end when we really wanted it to smash through. Thematically, a mixture of majors and minors. Dark made a lot of sense with it being kind of minor oriented there with occasional phrygians or pentatonic minors there, but Paperthin and Shadows were more sort of like bittersweet and major oriented, and it was kind of an interesting choice there despite the subject matter. I think that we weren't trying to sort of commit too heavily to the darkness in that part there, and then when we literally recorded Dark, we're like, okay, you know, screw it, we're just gonna make that. When we're not going to necessarily try to sugarcoat it, we're just going to commit to it. And it's not like we didn't play with notes, chords outside of the majors and minors when we were making Dark. There we had some interesting chromatics, like especially with the bass lines underneath it. But I kind of give credit to the fact that they're able to fully commit to a key signature matching the tone of subject matter, but also doing stuff with Paperthin and Shredders where they kind of force you to listen to the lyrics to fully understand the intricacies of it, or like where they even manage to use the tones and textures to elicit a feeling outside of generically kind of happy with these pieces, like with again with the mistiness or reverb tails like Paperthin and stuff like that. I dig that we were able to use these major keys in a way where, because it wasn't generic sounding, it was more kind of a better fit, I think, with what we were talking about. I think it was because of the structures, the unconventional sort of like note choices there, and just that the vocals were the focal point through the piece outside of those solo sections. The studio recording, mixing, and mastering was fantastic. I think typically the vocals were nice and present in the mix. The guitars, bass, drums, keys, organs, the Foley, etc. Nice to spread around the stereo field. No resonances in the frequency spectrum. Music's around you in the headphones. There was dynamic range to it, like in Dark, things went completely quiet. There were typically bell curves to the pieces where there was like a dynamic range of like the difference between the quiet and loud notes from a production as well as a compositional perspective, which was cool. I like when you're not just putting everything on one end or the other. The vocals were not overproduced. Nick Alexander can clearly sing, and it's nice to have with a bit of pumping occasionally. But the bus compression and limiting was handled. There's no applicable constructive critique apart from what I mentioned about the shadows. The kind of double tracking was kind of a bit too prominent for me, and that's the part where it kind of spread out around the sides of the stereo field there. But aside from that, it's totally fine. Even then, it could just be the headphones. I had to listen through it in mono to kind of figure out what's going on there. But it was an interesting sort of decision regardless. I think again there was automation of certain components with like where they were positioned in the stereo field that was kind of cool. It showcases an understanding of the studio side in a way that's very, very productive and positive. From a general listener's perspective, I think that it's just nice to be taken on a journey, especially with songs like Dark. I mean, Dark was my favorite track of today. It sounds commercial grade. The other two do too, don't get me wrong. These are three very good songs. I like when musicians can take you in like segment tracks, make them transition very seamlessly, not make it seem over dramatic, but I suppose in kind of a weird way they make what they're going through exciting, like you want to listen or hear more about it. I feel like it's integral to the listening experience nowadays, especially with limited attention spans. And I think it'll be interesting to hear, given the change in sort of like approach from like the earlier material like Shadows and Paperthin to Dark, where we go from here. But I wish Nick Alexander all the best in future. Thank you for watching my review of these three tracks from Nick Alexander titled Dark, Paperthin, and Shadows, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via the various social medias in their Spotify page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as you need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, and I will catch you in the next SB Reacts. Spiderhands out.